Thomas Jefferson. On July 4th, 1826, 83-year-old Thomas Jefferson died at his beloved Monticello plantation in Virginia. He was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence and the third President of the United States. In his final months, Jefferson battled severe uremia, toxemia from kidney failure, and a painfully enlarged prostate. He was bedridden, racked with constant pain as his organs slowly shut down one by one. Yet despite his failing body, Jefferson became fixated on one final goal. He was determined to survive until July 4th, 1826. The 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. He kept drifting in and out of feverish delirium, waking up just long enough to ask his doctor the same desperate question. Is it the 4th? Through sheer force of will, Jefferson held on through July 3rd. Then, just past noon, on July 4th, exactly 50 years to the day after the Declaration was adopted, Thomas Jefferson breathed his last. He had achieved his final wish. His timing was almost supernatural in its precision. On that very same day, 90-year-old John Adams died at his home in Quincy, Massachusetts. Adams, the second president, and a driving force behind American independence, was succumbing to congestive heart failure. Incredibly, Adams and Jefferson, once bitter political rivals who later became close friends through years of heartfelt letters, died on the exact same date. Exactly 50 years after the birth of the nation they helped create. As Adams lay dying, he had no idea that Jefferson had already passed away hours earlier in Virginia. News traveled far too slowly in those days. Adams believed his old friend was still alive. His famous last words, uttered just before his heart finally gave out, were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He died, believing Jefferson had outlived him. In reality, Jefferson had slipped away earlier that same day, roughly 500 miles away. The coincidence stunned the young nation. The last two surviving giants of the Revolution dying on the 50th anniversary of Independence Day felt almost like divine timing, a final, patriotic miracle. Benjamin Franklin passed away on April 17, 1790, at the age of 84 in Philadelphia. The brilliant inventor, diplomat, and polymath had helped secure French support for the American Revolution. His final years were filled with agony from a massive bladder stone and crippling gout, forcing him to rely on heavy doses of opium just to endure the pain. But the bladder stone wasn't what ultimately killed him. Franklin developed severe pleurisy, an inflammation of the lining around the lungs. This led to a massive infected abscess growing inside his lung. The abscess filled with fluid and pus, making every breath more difficult. Finally, the abscess burst inside his chest, flooding his lungs with infected material. Franklin essentially drowned from the inside out. As pus and fluid filled his lungs, the man who had tamed electricity and mapped the Gulf Stream died suffocating in his own bed, drowning in the contents of his ruptured lung infection. George Washington died on December 14, 1799, at the age of 67, at his Mount Vernon estate in Virginia. Just 2 days earlier, the former president had been out riding his horse for hours in freezing rain and snow, inspecting his property. He returned home soaked and chilled to the bone, but stubbornly refused to change out of his wet clothes before dinner. The next day, Washington developed a severe throat infection, likely acute epiglottitis, causing his throat to swell dramatically and making breathing nearly impossible. His doctors turned to the standard medical practice of the time: aggressive bloodletting. They believed draining bad blood would reduce inflammation. Over the course of about 12 hours, 3 physicians removed roughly 80 ounces of blood, somewhere between 40 and 50% of Washington's total blood volume. Washington slipped into hypovolemic shock while still struggling to breathe through his swollen throat. He slowly suffocated even as he bled out. His final words were simple and dignified. "'Tis well." The father of his country was essentially bled to death by the very doctors trying to save him. Alexander Hamilton met his end on July 12, 1804, at the age of 47 in New York City. The brilliant first Secretary of the Treasury and architect of America's financial system had fought a duel the previous morning with Vice President Aaron Burr in Weehawken, New Jersey. Burr fired a .54 caliber pistol at close range. The heavy lead ball struck Hamilton above his right hip. The bullet didn't kill him instantly. It tore a devastating path through his body, fracturing a rib, ripping through his liver and diaphragm, and finally lodging in his lumbar vertebrae. The impact instantly paralyzed Hamilton from the waist down. He collapsed, fully conscious, screaming in unimaginable agony from the internal damage. Doctors could do nothing to ease his suffering. Hamilton endured 31 brutal hours of excruciating pain before he finally died. The founding father who shaped the nation's economy passed away, paralyzed, helpless, and completely aware until the very end. Gouverneur Morris, known as the pen of the Constitution for writing the famous preamble and much of the final text, died on November 6, 1816, at the age of 64 in New York. In his final days, he suffered from a severe urinary tract blockage that left him unable to urinate and in terrible pain. He needed a catheter, but refused to wait for a proper doctor and instruments. Instead, Maurice took a rigid piece of whalebone from his wife's corset and tried to use it as a makeshift catheter. He forced the sharp, inflexible bone up his own urethra in an attempt to clear the blockage. The improvised procedure went horribly wrong. Maurice tore his internal urinary tract, leading to massive internal bleeding and infection. The man who wrote "We the People" died from a catastrophically botched attempt at self-surgery. Patrick Henry, the fiery orator, famous for declaring "Give me liberty or give me death," died on June 6, 1799. At age 63, at his Red Hill plantation in Virginia, he suffered from intussusception, a condition where part of the intestine telescopes into self, causing a complete and agonizing blockage. Surgery wasn't an option in the 18th century. His doctor offered a desperate experimental treatment: a vial of pure liquid mercury. The idea was that the heavy metal's weight would physically push the twisted intestines back into place. Henry drank the mercury. The toxic treatment failed completely. It couldn't clear the blockage and instead poisoned his system. The man who demanded liberty died from a failed medical experiment involving one of the deadliest substances known at the time. Thomas Paine, author of the revolutionary pamphlet Common Sense, that helped ignite the fight for independence, died on June 8, 1809, at age 72 in Greenwich Village, New York. By then, Paine had been ostracized by much of American society for his radical religious views. Only 6 people attended his funeral. He was buried on his farm in New Rochelle. 10 years later, an English radical named William Cobbett dug up Paine's remains in the middle of the night, intending to build a grand memorial in England. But Cobbett went bankrupt, and Paine's bones were sold off as curiosities. Over the decades, the skeleton was scattered and lost. To this day, no one knows where Thomas Paine's remains are. The man whose words inspired millions has no known grave. George Wythe, signer of the Declaration of Independence, America's first law professor, and Thomas Jefferson's mentor, was murdered on June 8, 1806, at age 79 in Richmond, Virginia. His own teenage grandnephew, greedy for inheritance, poisoned Wythe's morning coffee with a massive dose of arsenic. Wythe endured 2 agonizing weeks of stomach cramps, vomiting, and internal burning. He remained conscious long enough to realize what had happened, call for his lawyer, and rewrite his will, completely disinheriting his murderer. Only after cutting off the man who killed him did Wythe finally succumb to the arsenic. Finally, James Madison, the father of the Constitution and 4th president, died on June 28, 1836, at age 85 at his Montpelier estate. He was suffering from chronic rheumatism and severe liver problems. After Jefferson and Adams both died on July 4th in 1826, it had become a strange national obsession for founding fathers to die on Independence Day. Madison's doctors noticed he was fading in late June and offered stimulant drugs that could artificially keep his heart beating just long enough to reach July 4th. Madison flatly refused. He called it a ridiculous parlor trick and insisted on dying naturally, on his own terms. He stopped eating and quietly withered away. Madison died 6 days before the anniversary, choosing dignity over patriotic symbolism. These were the men who built America, yet their final moments were often filled with pain, irony, medical horror, and strange coincidences that still fascinate us today. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Drop your suggestions for the next founding father or historical mystery in the comments. I read every single one. And check out the next video on your screen. You don't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.